I killed a Fortune 500 company on a Tuesday morning, and I didn't even have to be in the building to do it. The most expensive sound in the world isn't a bomb exploding or a car crashing. It is the silence of a logistics terminal when the conveyor belts stop moving. They looked at my salary, saw a number they didn't like, and decided I was redundant. What they didn't know was that their entire empire wasn't running on servers, or trucks, or fuel. It was running on a piece of logic inside my head. And when they walked me out the door, they didn't realize they were walking out the only person who knew the password. If this story of corporate arrogance meeting its inevitable end satisfies a hunger for justice, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now let me explain how the dominoes fell. My name is Elena Vance. For 10 years, I served as the Director of Operations for Redline Logistics. To the outside world, Redline was a giant that moved critical auto parts for the biggest manufacturers in Detroit. We were the veins and arteries of the American automotive industry. But inside it was a mess. Or at least, it was a mess before I arrived. When I started, the company was bleeding money. Shipments were lost in transit. Fines for late deliveries were eating our profits alive, and clients were leaving in droves. I spent 3 years of my life sleeping under my desk, surviving on vending machine coffee and sheer stubbornness, building Vector. Vector wasn't just software. It was a digital twin of my brain. I designed it to pull data from traffic cameras, weather satellites, say, labor union newsletters, and even local police scanners. It optimized routes in real time. It predicted problems before they happened. It saved Redline roughly $40 million a year in fuel and penalties alone. It was my masterpiece. But then came Marcus Sterling. Marcus was the new CEO. He was 28 years old, had an MBA from a prestigious university, and possessed absolutely 0 days of experience on a loading dock. He wore suits that cost more than my car and spoke in buzzwords like synergy and lean management. From the moment he arrived, I became a target. To him, I wasn't an asset. I was old guard. I was a legacy cost. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. He summoned me to his glass-walled office. He didn't even look me in the eye when I entered. He was too busy scrolling on his tablet, probably looking at his own stock options. "Elena," he said, finally glancing up with a bored expression. "We're restructuring. The board feels that your department is bloated. We're pivoting to a new AI-driven management team." I stood there, feeling the cold air conditioning of his office hit my skin. AI-driven, I repeated calmly. "Marcus, Vector is the AI. I built it." He waved his hand dismissively. "Vector is legacy code, Elena. It's clunky. We've hired a team of 3 brilliant junior analysts. They're going to modernize the stack. Effectively, immediately, your position is sunsetted." He slid a packet across the desk. "A severance agreement, an NDA, a termination notice." I looked at the papers. Then I looked at him. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for my job. I didn't remind him that I was the only person who knew how to navigate the upcoming dock workers' strike in California. I just felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. "Okay," I said. I signed the paperwork. I walked out of his office, past the bustling floor, past the dispatchers screaming into headsets, past the millions of dollars of inventory moving seamlessly across the country because of the system I built. I walked out to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and checked my watch. It was 10:14 a.m. I knew that at exactly 12 p.m., Vector would attempt to perform its daily handshake with the main server. It was a security protocol I had installed years ago. It would look for my biometric authorization. It would look for the specific encryption key on my company laptop, which was now sitting in a cardboard box in the trunk of my car. And when it didn't find it, Vector wouldn't delete anything. It wouldn't crash. It wouldn't release a virus. It would simply stop. It would revert to factory settings. I turned the key in the ignition and drove home. The countdown had begun. To understand why this was catastrophic, it is necessary to understand the nature of the deal I made 10 years ago. Back when the company was failing, They couldn't afford to pay me a bonus. So I negotiated a specific clause in my contract. I retained full intellectual property rights to any custom coding or algorithms I developed. I licensed Vector to Redline for a fee of $1 per year, renewable annually upon my continued employment. Essentially, they were renting the engine of their car from me, and they had just fired the landlord. For the first 48 hours, nothing happened. That was by design. Vector had a cache buffer. It could run on autopilot for 2 days using historical data. This gave the illusion that everything was fine. It gave Marcus just enough rope to hang himself. I spent those 2 days gardening. I caught up on some reading. I grilled steaks in my backyard. It was the first time in 10 years I hadn't checked my work phone every 5 minutes. The silence was beautiful. I imagined Marcus in his office, feet up on the desk, bragging to the board about how much money he had saved by firing the expensive director of operations. He probably felt like a genius. But genius requires foresight, and Marcus was blind. On Thursday morning, the buffer ran out. The first sign was subtle. Redline specialized in just-in-time delivery. This means parts arrive at a factory exactly 4 hours before they are needed on the assembly line. At 8 a.m. on Thursday, a fleet of trucks carrying engine blocks was supposed to be rerouted around a massive pileup on Interstate 80 in Ohio. Vector would have caught this automatically. It would have sent a push notification to the driver's tablets, rerouting them through a secondary highway. But Vector was gone. The system had reverted to basic GPS. The trucks drove straight into the traffic jam. They sat there for 6 hours. The assembly plant in Detroit ran out of engine blocks at 1 p.m. The line stopped. For a car manufacturer, a stopped line costs roughly $20,000 per minute. I was at the grocery store buying milk when my personal phone rang. It was a number I recognized. Sarah, the head dispatcher. She was a good kid, loyal. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't an employee anymore. I had no obligation to answer. By 2 p.m., my phone was buzzing incessantly. Texts, calls, emails to my personal account. I went home and opened my laptop, my personal MacBook. I logged into the public tracking interface that Redline provides to clients. It was a sea of red. Usually, the map of the United States looked like a well-choreographed dance of green dots. Now, it looked like a cardiac arrest. Trucks were idling in the wrong states. Refrigerated units carrying sensitive electronics were sitting in the desert heat because the priority routing had failed. Drivers were calling in, screaming that their manifests were blank. And the fines? I did a quick mental calculation. Based on the Detroit shutdown alone, Redline had already lost more money in 4 hours than they would have paid me in 10 years. Friday was when the real panic set in. According to a friend of mine still on the inside, Marcus tried to fix the issue. He brought in his new team. Trey, the lead analyst Marcus hired to replace me, tried to manually override the system. Trey found the Vector protocol in the server root. He saw it was labeled, inactive, license expired. Instead of calling me or checking the legal records, Trey assumed it was a bug. He tried to force start the script. He tried to bypass the encryption. This was a fatal error. I had built Vector with a dead man's switch for security. If someone tried to crack the code without the key, Chief Vector assumed it was a corporate espionage attack. At 10:30 a.m. Friday, Vector didn't just stay off. It went into lockdown mode. It scrubbed the local caches on every terminal in the building to protect the proprietary data. Suddenly, Redline didn't just have bad routing. They had no data. Customer lists, historical shipping lanes, carrier contracts, everything that was integrated into the Vector interface vanished behind a 256-bit encryption wall. The entire company went blind. That afternoon, a courier arrived at my front door. It wasn't a severance check. It wasn't an apology. It was a cease and desist letter from Redline's legal department. They were accusing me of sabotage. They claimed I had planted a logic bomb in their servers. They threatened federal prosecution, a lawsuit for damages, and immediate seizure of my personal assets. I read the letter and laughed out loud in my kitchen. They were trying to bully me. They thought I was just some middle-aged logistics manager who would fold under pressure. They didn't realize that I had prepared for this day the moment I met Marcus. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, David. "David," I said, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "It's happening. Send the packet." Monday morning, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. Redline stock had dropped 40% over the weekend. Major clients, Ford, GM, Tesla, were canceling contracts. The rumors were flying that Redline was insolvent. Marcus was trying to save his skin. He had spun a narrative that I was a disgruntled former employee who hacked the system from the outside. He was positioning himself as the victim of cyber terrorism. I wasn't invited to the meeting, but David, my lawyer, was. And thanks to a provision in the corporate bylaws regarding intellectual property disputes, he was allowed to present our defense. I waited in the car outside the headquarters. I wanted to see this. David later told me exactly how it went down. Marcus was at the head of the table, sweating through his expensive suit. He was in the middle of a PowerPoint presentation titled "The Threat of Internal Sabotage." David cleared his throat and interrupted. "Mr. Sterling," David said, his voice cutting through the tension, "you are characterizing the Vector shutoff as an act of sabotage. Is that correct?" "It's a malicious attack," Marcus shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "She wiped our servers. She held our data hostage." "Incorrect," David said calmly. He opened his briefcase. "My client simply stopped providing a service that you stopped paying for. You fired her. Her employment was the payment for the license. No employment. No license." David slid a document down the long mahogany table. It was the original contract, magnified to poster size. "Section 4, Paragraph B," David recited. "All proprietary algorithms, specifically the dynamic routing protocol designated as Vector, remain the sole property of Elena Vance. Redline Logistics is granted a revocable, non-transferable license to utilize this software contingent upon Ms. Vance's continued employment as Director of Operations." The chairman of the board, a terrifying old man named Mr. Hennessy, picked up the paper. He put on his reading glasses. The room was silent. "You mean to tell me," Hennessy said, his voice low and dangerous, "that the software running this entire company doesn't belong to us?" Marcus stammered. I wasn't aware of that specific legacy clause. It's standard practice to own employee work. Who reads the appendices?" "It is standard," David agreed. "Unless you hire a genius to save your bankrupt company and she negotiates better terms than you do." "You didn't read the contract, did you, Marcus?" Hennessy looked at Marcus. The look wasn't anger. It was disgust. It was the look one gives to a dog that has just soiled an expensive rug. "Fix this," Hennessy hissed. "Get her back, whatever it costs." "We can't," Marcus whispered, his face pale. "I threatened to sue her on Friday." David smiled. The trap was sprung. "Actually, regarding that threat, since you accused my client of a federal crime without evidence, and since you are currently holding her intellectual property hostage on your hardware, Ms. Vance is countersuing for defamation and breach of contract, and, effectively immediately, she is permanently revoking the Redline license for Vector." David stood up, closed his briefcase, and delivered the final blow. "Redline has 24 hours to purge Vector from its drives, or we will file for an injunction to shut down your entire IT infrastructure. Have a good day, gentlemen." The aftermath was brutal. Redline Logistics couldn't operate without Vector. They tried to go back to manual spreadsheets, but the volume was too high. They missed critical deliveries for 2 weeks straight. Their reputation was incinerated. Clients left. The stock became worthless. Within 3 months, Redline was acquired by a competitor for pennies on the dollar. The first thing the new owners did was liquidate the executive team. Marcus wasn't just fired. He was blacklisted. In the logistics world, word travels fast. He became known as the CEO, who fired the brain of the company to save a buck. Last I heard, He was trying to sell solar panels door to door in Arizona. As for me, remember that competitor who bought Redline? They knew exactly what Vector was. They had been trying to replicate it for years. When they acquired the assets, they called me. They didn't want me to work for them as an employee. They wanted to license Vector properly. I set up my own consulting firm. I licensed Vector to them for a 7-figure annual fee, plus a retainer for my consulting services. I work about 15 hours a week now. I spend the rest of the time on my boat. Sometimes I sit on the deck, looking out at the water, and I think about that Tuesday morning in Marcus's office. I think about how dismissed I felt, how small he tried to make me feel. He thought he was cutting the fat. He didn't realize he was cutting the jugular. There is a lesson here for every corporate climber and cost cutter out there. Before you tear down a fence, you should always ask why it was put up in the first place. And before you fire the quiet woman in the corner who leaves at exactly 5 p.m. every day, you better make sure she isn't the one holding the keys to the castle, because systems break, servers crash. But the architect remembers everything. Have you ever been the invisible glue holding a broken system together? Or have you watched a boss make a mistake that cost them everything? Leave a comment down below with your story. I read every single one. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is just walking away.